Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Yellen, welcome to today's hearing. Thank you for being here. Inflation is at the top of my statement as well. Inflation is hurting American families and eroding wages. People are adjusting spending even on basic necessities just to make ends meet. They are being hammered at the gas pump and in the grocery aisles and across the economy. As wages rise to keep up with inflation, odds of an inflationary wage price spiral rise. Inflation became broad-based and accelerated last year following the Untargeted American Rescue Plan Act. That act poured $1.9 trillion of inflation fuel into an economy with growing supply chain disruptions and households with elevated disposable incomes and liquid savings. Following that, Democrats pushed for trillions more in reckless spending. The result, which many predicted, has been inflation at highs not seen in 40 years. As prospects of recession and stagflation rise, this is no time to consider raising taxes or resurrecting reckless spending proposals from the House-passed Build Back Better bill. The Congressional Budget Office's 10-year outlook is another warning sign that our national debt, currently at $30.5 trillion, excuse me just one moment, is another sign that we are on an unsustainable track, headed to new record highs. Inflation and accompanying higher interest rates mean higher net interest costs to services that service the national debt, crowding out other fiscal priorities. As the economy has been in recovery from COVID-related shutdowns, revenue has been up sharply under the tax system put into place before the pandemic. CBO expects revenue this year to rise to 20% of GDP, the highest in more than 2 decades, and then average well above the 50-year historical average. Nonetheless, Democrats appear to want to raise taxes even more in the face of rising odds of recession. One harmful policy is a minimum tax on financial statement or book income, something so fundamentally flawed that both parties abandoned the previously enacted version more than 30 years ago. This harmful policy would overwhelmingly hit American manufacturers as well as undercut investments in U.S. innovation and emerging technologies. This is not the only proposal from Democrats that would harm the competitiveness of American companies. Another prominent example is the international tax agreement that Treasury has negotiated with the OECD. Under both pillars of the agreement, Treasury has agreed to give foreign countries sweeping new rights to tax U.S. companies. In an apparent attempt to bind Congress, Treasury agreed to terms without engaging in meaningful consultation with Congress. For more than a year, my Republican colleagues and I have repeatedly requested information on the agreement and its potential effects. Treasury, however, has repeatedly declined to provide any analysis of the effect of the agreement on U.S. businesses or U.S. revenue or the U.S. economy overall. And from what we can see, that impact will be significant on U.S. companies, making them less competitive globally. We now know that Treasury's failure to share substantive detail foreshadowed underlying flaws and a lack of coherent principles in the agreement. It's increasingly clear that terms agreed to by Treasury will harm U.S. businesses and undermine tax provisions enacted by Congress to encourage certain activities. The flaw with this approach is that the agreement cannot be fully implemented without congressional action. In many cases, the terms can only be properly carried out with a multilateral treaty requiring a 2/3 vote by the Senate. By agreeing to sweeping changes of this nature without bipartisan support, Treasury has put at risk tax certainty and the prospect of a durable or long-lasting agreement. Beyond lack of information about the international tax agreement, nothing more is known about a possible leak of private taxpayer data from the IRS to the left-leaning group ProPublica than we knew 1 year ago when it was first reported. More work is also necessary to establish independent oversight and financial controls over the $350 billion funding to states and localities in the American Rescue Plan, where no meaningful oversight was established. Treasury must also be willing to consult Congress on debt management, which it has thus far only been comfortable doing with Wall Street and the Federal Reserve. The committee, which is Treasury's authorizing committee, deserves more transparency and accountability from Treasury than we have been receiving. Madam Secretary, I do appreciate your service, and I look forward to hearing your testimony on these matters today. Thank you.